Account transcribed by William of Rubruck from Mongol leader Mangu Khan to the French King Louis. It continues with the theme of conquering with not much room for negotiation. One important part of Crusader-Mongol relations is the Battle of Ain Jalut, which happened on September 3rd, 1260. So the Crusaders did not actually fight in this, but they allowed the Mamluk forces to pass through their territory unharmed so that they could fight the Mongols, and this actually was one of the biggest defeats in Mongol history. This battle is so important because, one, it shows that the Crusaders, they actually considered, many of them, siding with the Mongols. They eventually went with the enemy that they knew, but because there even was this debate about whom they should fight for, it shows how relations between all these different warring powers was complicated and fluid during this time. And it left room open, I would argue, for future developments, as we will see that actual alliances were formed between the Crusaders and the Mongols. And this isn't the focus of my paper, but later on also there are Muslim and Mongol alliances forged too. So here we have the letter from the master of a temple in Acre to the preceptor of Templar houses in England, dated March 1261. This letter is significant for a couple of reasons. First, it brings back up again the theme of punishment for your sins, and not quite the apocalypse, but close, as in this is God's wrath and Crusaders need to stop with their sinful ways. Secondly, this text is also important because it gives you some historical context. It tells you about all of the towns that the Mongols have conquered, which helps historians. Thirdly, this again emphasizes the increasing importance of nations, and that they are asking specifically for England for help, for the King and Queen of England to fund them in their crusade against the Mongols, because these are Christian warrior knights. They're crusaders of the crusader states instead of, possibly they did this as well, but it's significant that they're reaching out to a secular reign instead of the Catholic Church. And lastly, I think this text is also important is because it is one of the first ones to highlight the difference between the various actors at play here. They talk about the people of Antioch, how they actually sided, which Antioch was a crusader state, Christian. They sided with the Mongols, showing how complicated politics was at that time and how we shouldn't just group all crusaders and all Christian kingdoms into one. It wasn't just like the empire of the Catholic Church. There were a lot of different players and a lot of different decisions made, and so this shows the complicatedness of diplomacy at this time between the Crusaders and the Mongols and others. Here's a letter from Hulagu, the Mongol ruler of the Ilkhanate or Persian territories of the Mongolian Empire, to Louis IX of France. It's dated in 1262, so that's between the 7th and 8th Crusades. This text is important for a fair number of reasons, one of which is that it emphasizes that although the Mongol Empire still has the same intents of conquering and ruling, they are now more open to alliances. And same with the Christian state, which compared to the Pope's harsh letter before stating that they must convert to Christianity and therefore be under his control, this letter highlights that Louis IX had already struck up some kind of an alliance, truce, friendly relations with the Mongolians. They talk about this beautiful portable church that he sends, and then they list that they spared some Hungarians who were Christians and then that were wrongly persecuted. Likewise, it says that they returned the city of Jerusalem. So these are more than just empty gestures. They seem to allude to a real kind of alliance between Louis IX and Mongols. It follows in the same vein of the Antioch, how they helped them, although Antioch was a bit of a vassal state, but it still shows that relations between the Crusaders, Crusader states, Christian Crusader rulers of Louis, who organized and led two crusades with an alliance between the Mongols. They have a very dynamic relationship. Another important aspect of this letter is that it points, again, this recurring theme of the growing importance of the nation and its leader. And so the Pope, it says, at first we believe the high priest, the Pope, to be the king of the Franks or the emperor, but instead they now think that it's Louis who's the most beneficial to talk to, which shows a true change in how the Crusades were run. Like even before, when, especially in the First Crusade, nobles would lead it, but they were doing so all in the name of the Pope. And we even read about how they thought that Pope Urban was going to actually come with them in some cases. So I know I've mentioned this before, but just a little more about the Crusader states' Antioch's alliance with the Mongols. They actually fought with them. They helped them capture Baghdad and other cities as well. I think that this alliance is particularly important because, one, it shows, as I mentioned before, like just how dynamic the relation between Crusaders were and the Mongols, but also that it would be erroneous for us to treat all Crusader states, just anyone under the Catholic Church's domain, as one singular unit, which I think people can tend to do, especially in like our common pop culture. There's just the Crusaders, the Knights, and we picture like Knights Templar or something, but that's actually erroneous. But this highlights how while some were at war and fearful of Mongol invasion again of Europe, here Crusaders were fighting with the Mongols. Lastly, here's a letter from Oljaitu to King Philip IV of France. It was in 1305, and this letter mainly concerns restarting an alliance between the two of them and suggests a military cooperation. And this shows the reoccurring theme of a possible military collaboration. Even though these never really seem to be fruitful, it's a reoccurring suggestion between the two groups, which I think that one could say, even if the military collaboration was more symbolic, the offer of it more symbolic than anything, it does show how the two sides did start to truly endeavor to have a stable relationship with each other, which shows a great change from what it was 100 years earlier, not even, and which points to the active diplomacy of the time. So ultimately, the history of the Crusaders and the Mongols is a fascinating one, and it allows us a much more complex picture of what's happening in the 13th century as it relates to the Crusaders, Christianity, Crusader states. People, I think, like to oversimplify the relations between the Mongols and the Crusaders, and to do so, you lose out on a lot of fascinating diplomacy and a real look into how politics was conducted during this time. And it really reveals a lot also about the state of Christianity, the Crusades back in Europe as well. Here are my picture sources. And here are my sources for my information. Please feel free to pause it if you want to look at them. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like me to answer any questions about this presentation, I would be happy to upload another video of me talking and answering them if that's something that you would like me to do. Hey, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.